tumbly. That's telling me it's time for a small smackerel of something sweet.
Sweet Jesus, Paul, that's not honey. That's the strength and will required to restore the Roman Emperor.
Oh, bother.
Anyways, here's Wonderwall.
Good morning, everybody. So, taking a swig of the old coffee. We are going to be having a good time today. I see there's one person in the chat with us. Whoever you are, thank you for joining. You haven't sounded off in the comments, but it's okay. Today is a much anticipated thing because last week I saw the train wreck that was Gladiator 2. And this has been long awaited by many people to see my sperg out. Oh, Miranda's in the chat. My lovely co-host who is at work and very excited. We're going to be heading over to her place here. The person joining us right now, so he's not going to be on the actual show, but it'll be fun to have in the chat. But anyways, so in 2000, Ridley Scott released Gladiator 1. It was nominated for Best Picture, had an all-star cast, and the movie was fronted by Russell Crowe. And I think one could argue that Gladiator kind of took his career off. Like he was in some big films before then, but like Gladiator was really when I started. After Gladiator was really when I started remembering seeing him in a lot of other things. And despite its tremendous list of historical inaccuracies, very enjoyable film with a strong, powerful message, great acting, great writing. And it's kind of like insane to me that it didn't win Best Picture. It's a very good movie. And for years, there had been rumors that Scott was trying to get a sequel to Gladiator going. And let me tell you, there are some crazy ass Gladiator 2 options that are floating around on the web in terms of proposed sequels. Like, there was one where they were effectively going to make Maximus an immortal soldier that saw combat through all these conflicts, including like Vietnam and crap. Like, there's a lot of crazy ass shit that was proposed to make a sequel for this, or for Gladiator. And I'd say about 3 years ago, they came up with what is now Gladiator 2, and it started in pre-production, and there was all sorts of craziness going on with that. There was probably all sorts of rewrites. From what I remember, there was even talks of there being like a female lead and what have you, which frankly probably would have been better than what we got. I don't even know. I can't say. But the ensemble was brought together, and there's been a lot of interesting discourse going on about Gladiator 2 throughout the production, especially as while they were filming Gladiator 2, Napoleon was released, and this was the first partnership between Ridley Scott and the screenwriter. Let me make sure I've got this guy's name right. Let's see, director. Who's the writer? Written by David Scarpa. So this is the first kind of test of their combined efforts, and it sucked. It was a terrible, terrible movie. And so things weren't boding well for Gladiator 2 as a result. And as soon as promotional started on Gladiator 2, there was the whole issue of Denzel Washington's been cast as Macrinus and this, that, the other, and all these people were kind of throwing fits about, oh, this isn't accurate casting. And this is where Ridley Scott started to talk about Denzel's character, and was the birth of probably my favorite thing to do with this movie, #CanonGate. Because in this quote, he was talking about how Denzel's character is an arms merchant and was supplying the Roman army with food, weapons, catapults, cannon, and other things. And that just jumped out at me because, if cannons existed in ancient Rome, one could argue that they would have maintained their supremacy, as that's like a solid 1,000 years prior to cannons arriving in the European continent, which is a massive, massive game changer. Because you think of, the big thing that really causes a decline in Roman military supremacy in the West is the arrival of the nomadic steppe peoples like the Huns, who are coming in from the east and are pushing the Germanic tribes like the Goths from Germany into the European heartland. And this causes a lot of problems for Rome in terms of maintaining its border, and it causes a shift in their military approach, as the heavy infantry model is not sustainable against mounted archers. As Crassus found out in what is it, like 48 or 50 BC, at Battle of Carrhae. But neither here nor there. Point is there's been a lot of silliness going on with this movie, and so I went to go see it on Thursday. I went to a pre-matinee showing so that it was the cheapest ticket humanly possible. And I could not have been prepared for how bad this is. I think Daily Roman Updates put it the best, whereas like if you hadn't seen Gladiator 1, it was probably like a 4 or 5 out of 10. But if you'd seen the first movie, it's so much worse because this movie is literally a rehash of the first film that's half-assed and completely undercuts the first movie while ironically relying on the impact of the first film and on the weight of the first film to make its serious moments work, which is very humorous. So before we get started talking about what I thought, we're going to kind of break this down Army AAR style. So AAR is like after action report, right? So what we do in that one in the military is it starts off and what like you effectively establish what your mission was, do an overview of it, then gets 3 sustains, 3 improves. I'm going to let you know right now, we're going to kind of ditch that format after this because there's not a lot that I can say nice about this movie. There's like maybe 2 things. So, but as a basis, let's talk about it. All right. So Gladiator 2, we're following, we're following the events of the first movie. And at the end of the first film, Commodus, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is killed by Maximus, played by Russell Crowe. And since those events, Lucius, Commodus's nephew and Marcus Aurelius's grandson, was sent into hiding because he is now a target of political dealings, whether that's assassination or manipulation, whatever. So he's sent away, and he ends up finding himself in Numidia, beyond the Roman Empire's reach, allegedly. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And establishes a new persona as Hanno, where he grows up in Numidia, has a wife, all this other stuff. And so now our inciting incident of this film is Rome has come to Numidia and is besieging it by sea. And so Hanno and his wife, I'm not going to bother looking her up, are a part of the defense force of the city. And the city's chief is played by Paul Mensa. I'm not going to bother looking up that character's name either. Just, it's important to note he's played by Paul Mensa. For those of you guys who don't know who that is off the top of their heads, Paul Mensa plays Enemeus in the Spartacus TV show, and he was the messenger in 300 that gets kicked down the well. Brilliant character actor. Really like his work, and I'm making sure that I stress this for a point, and we're going to get there. But so we have our Lucius, who's now grown up as Hanno. He's played by Paul Mescal, and the battle goes the Romans' way, and the Romans are commanded by General Acacius, who is played by Pedro Pascal. And during this battle, Hanno's wife gets killed by Roman archers, which is a very funny thing to say. Killed by Roman archers. And so he has an axe to grind with General Acacius. But he survives the battle and gets enslaved and is being brought back to Italy. This is where our narrative kind of splits ways in a way. So you've got all the people that survived the fight in Numidia, which include Paul Mescal's Lucius / Hanno, and Paul Mensa's Numidian chieftain that he's playing. And they're being brought to an arena as slaves to be executed. Meanwhile, Pedro Pascal's Acacius is heading back to Rome. Ali, we're getting there. So Ali saying was to join us. Thank you. Right now, we're just kind of going through the bare bones of the plot. I got to kind of establish everything that happens, because if I don't, this is just going to turn into a disorganized rant. And I want to be able to point out specific things and why they don't work. And so I've gone through and I've kind of streamlined what the plot of this movie is. And then we're going to go and attack it piece by piece. We're doing this in a military fashion. We're doing this in a way that the Romans would appreciate. Anyways, so Acacius, as I was saying, General Acacius gets back to Rome, where he is greeted by the two emperors, Geta and Caracalla, and they have given him a triumph, which, if you know anything about Roman history, is not remotely feasible, because there hadn't been a triumph for a non-emperor since before Augustus Antarius during the Eastern Roman Empire after the Vandal conquests in the 1000s. So, whatever. Being a successful Roman general, in fact, was probably the most hazardous profession in the Roman Empire, as if you got too much glory under your belt, that put a target on your back politically. But point is, Cassius is brought back in a triumph. The emperors give him a pat on the back and say, okay, cool, you get a little bit of an R&R while we throw you some gladiatorial games, and then we're going to send you off to Parthia to fight the Persians. I should also note, during this sequence, Pedro Pascal's Acacius. Hold on 1 second, guys. And we're back. Sorry about that, guys. Unfortunately, sometimes, you get unfortunate timed calls. But anyways, as I was saying before, Acacius is told he's got a couple of days to rest while they put together gladiatorial games in his honor. And when those finish, he's going to be sent off to Parthia to conquer the Persians. I should also note that during this exchange, they have expanded the Roman Empire beyond any of its predecessors, which is a massive problem we will get to later. But anyways, from there, we go back. We're going back to the arena side of things. Peter Mensa and Paul Mescal are put into an arena with the other Numidian prisoners to fight baboons. That is their execution. Peter Mensa literally just allows himself to get mauled by a baboon. And this is like maybe 20 minutes into the movie. So it's like, okay, guess we're just wasting a good character actor. Why not? And then Paul Mescal ends up impressing the audience. And amongst the audience is Macronus, Denzel Washington's character, who purchases him and brings him in to be a gladiator. In a sequence of events that feels very similar to the first film, Mescal is brought to the ludus and is a reluctant participant in training, much as Russell Crowe's Maximus was, just kind of wanting to die. But it's not really, it doesn't really come like it's one of these things where you're just kind of confused as to what's. At the end of the day, when Maximus is brought in, he was literally left half dead. His wife and his child had been murdered, and he had no reason left to live. And he doesn't fight in an arena until after the whole initial training sequence. In this, it's inversed, so it doesn't work. But then he gets talked to by Macronus, who is trying to get him to be a bit more enthusiastic about his role, and talks to him about, is like, okay, well, what can I do to get you to actually give a shit? And he Hanno, or Lucius, tells him, give me the general, who is Acacius, and Macronus goes, okay. And there's no real discussion beyond that. I was like, all right, I'll get you his head. I'll deliver him to you. And now they're heading back to Rome, and this gives us an opportunity to check back in with Acacius, who's returned to his villa, and it's revealed that his wife is none other than Lucilla, played by Connie Nielsen, reprising her role from the first film. And they're not just romantically entangled, they share the same political aspirations, and they're trying to effectively do the same plot from the first movie by getting the Senate all together behind the scenes to legitimize a military coup against the twin emperors and reestablish the Republic. This is this is where they're kind of trying to, oh, well, it's the same, but it's different. Next thing we know, Denzel Washington's Macronus has arrived in the city and is making bets with prominent senators, and they bring Macronus and Hanno to the emperor's palace to put Hanno on display, so that way he can impress the emperors and get into the games in the Colosseum. Gladiator there, and upon killing him, recites some pretty prominent verses from Virgil, which like bewilder people. But I have a feeling that if you're a Roman emperor, anything written by Virgil is going to like instantly strike a chord, and you're going to know what the hell that is. But I mean, whatever. He ends up going into the first fight, and they do the whole repeat of, they kind of combine. I don't even know what the thought process is. So there's a group of them fighting a gladiator riding a rhino, which is dumb. But during this fight, it turns into kind of a one-on-one between Hanno and the gladiator on the rhino. Don't ask where the rest of these guys are. They kind of stop participating about halfway through the fight. And so Hanno initially loses and impresses the crowd, so they give him, and then so the emperors give him mercy, and then he refuses Roman mercy, and then kills, mortally injures the other gladiator, brings him down on his knees, and then when the Romans ask him to kill, he's just he just completely decapitates the dude, which is seen in the trailers. And yeah, so at this point, Lucilla, who is in the box seats watching this, we've got Anime Decade is here. Sorry, this is the boring part of the stream. I'm just going through this horrible film. All right. Casey, so at this point, Lucilla, what's up, Anime Decade? Thanks for joining us. So at this point, Lucilla recognizes her son. She tries to talk to him, and he is upset that, she sent him away to save him and then never came back for him. And Lucilla then goes and pleads with Acacius to save her son from the arena. It's at this point that we get the second stage of the arena, which is a naval battle that is meant to be a reenactment of the Battle of Salamis. If you've heard any of the talk about CGI sharks, that's where these come in. Yes, the Colosseum was filled up with water to do naval battles. No, they did not fill the Colosseum with sharks. They would have had no way to capture sharks and bring them to the Colosseum. Rome was very advanced in a lot of things. I don't think that they would have been able to do that. I'm doing well, Anime Decade. Thanks. Then at this point, the rest of the movie is just kind of like a rush to the finish. You've got Denzel Washington wins a bunch of money from one of the senators due to this. And he has kind of figured out who Lucius is by this point. And so he uses the debt he has over the senators to uncover the scheme that Acacius and Lucilla are planning. And he rats them out to the emperors. Acacius launches a rescue of Lucius from the Colosseum, which results in all of Acacius's men getting killed by Praetorians and him being captured. They get pit against each other in a fight. And this is probably around I would say the climax of the film, around halfway. And so Acacius and Lucius end up fighting, but Acacius explains that, he's on the good team. He's trying to take down the big bad emperors. But before he can get much else out, he's lit up with arrows by the Praetorian, and this causes all of Rome to just start rioting. Denzel Washington uses the fervor of the crowd to and the crisis that's going on to play some cards, and kills Geta and manipulates Caracalla. And then when they're about to, like, at this point, God, there's just so much crap. At this point, Lucius sends a message to Acacius's army at Ostia that was there to help out with the scheme to bring them to the city, and support his claim to the throne, so that way he can reestablish the dream that is the Republic. And then Denzel Washington, his Macrinus has Caracalla set up the execution for Lucilla in another public game, and Lucius is meant to defend his mom by himself against a bunch of Praetorian, and Lucius doesn't play, like, it ends up freeing all the other gladiators and has them fight alongside him. And so it becomes a free-for-all between the Praetorian and the gladiators, and Lucius is trying to defend his mom. They use this scene as a way to kill all of the support cast remaining from the first Gladiator, which was really funny. Even when Connie Nielsen dies, it's like the most anticlimactic shit that you could imagine. And then the movie is resolved, where Denzel Washington's Macrinus has assembled the army of the Praetorian to meet Acacius's army coming up from Ostia. So you have hundreds, maybe even thousands of extras, all in Roman armor, marching towards each other. And then we don't get a battle. We get Macrinus and Lucius fighting one-on-one. Winner determines who moves forward. And it's kind of mind-blowing how it's like they have this fight set up, and you've got Macrinus, who's played by Denzel Washington, who's in his 60s, going up against a 30-year-old dude that's been training to be a gladiator for, at least the past month, plus his prior service as a defender of Numidia. And this guy is just getting worked on by Macrinus. Like, Macrinus is kicking his ass the majority of this fight. And the two armies are just standing there, just not doing anything, letting this happen. And I'm just like, okay, this guy just revealed himself to both armies as the grandson of Marcus Aurelius. I would think that would kind of result in somebody doing something. But then Macrinus loses, and yeah, the movie ends with Lucius returning to the Colosseum. His mom's body is gone, and then it just cuts to the same ending as Gladiator 1, with Russell Crowe's hand walking through the Elysian fields. All right, so that is like the summary of the plot. I've tried to speed it up as much as possible because, like, I want to provide the bare bones, but like, now we get into the nitty gritty. So I'm not going to sit here and say that there is nothing done right about this film. Set designs and everything like that, absolutely stunning. I mean, a lot of the sets are, kind of recycled from the first film. I'm going to bring up an image of the Colosseum here. But like, this is one of those things where it's like, if it's not broke, you don't need to fix it. So let's bring this up. Miranda's like, "Oh, you're back." Yes, I am back. All right. So like gorgeous sets and gorgeous costume designs. I do think it's funny that like the chosen weapon of the Praetorian archery has never been the strength of the Roman military at any point. Like that's something that you bring in a foreign auxilia for. But armor design, armor set designs, everything like that, absolutely stunning. This is actually from that final sequence where Lucius is defending his mom from the Praetorian who are there to execute all of these conspirators and Lucilla, and he's supposed to just defend all of them. Like shortly after this, a bunch of gladiators burst out and start helping out. And as this is going on, Macrinus kills Caracalla to become the guy in charge. So gorgeous designs. And then in terms of character performances, we get like really the only one that I would give any positive praise to would be Denzel. Denzel Washington is very enjoyable in this film. His character, Macrinus is like the epitome of mustache twirling villain in terms of Denzel's performance. I do think that it's incredibly hindered by the fact that, I'll bring up an image of Macrinus here. Here we go. So like we've got Denzel's Macrinus. So it's definitely, he definitely does a decent enough job with the of things, but the writing of this character is so thin, and I think that this is where really this film just falls apart, is nothing in it can withstand any sort of probing or analysis at all. You literally have to not think about why any of this stuff is happening in order for it to work, because otherwise it just falls the hell apart. So in this version, Macrinus is, in this story, I should say, Macrinus is a former slave of Marcus Aurelius who has reshaped himself since his freedom into a prosperous Roman freeman with a Roman identity, Roman name, official profession, all of this stuff. And his goal is to destroy Rome and rebirth it into how he sees it, or how he wants it to be, is like a Rome for the strong. Like, this movie is incredibly contrived and convoluted. Don't look too deep into anything. But Macrinus is allegedly a former slave of Aurelius, but we never really find anything else out about him. And Lucilla doesn't recognize him at all, which I find very interesting, as she's the daughter of Marcus Aurelius. This guy, within the Gladiator lore, Aurelius put an end to the gladiatorial game. So the idea of him having a slave that extends beyond household purposes, or being like a bodyguard of sort, is kind of it doesn't really make sense. So we have to assume that this guy is some form of household slave. Macrinus even talks about reading Marcus Aurelius's meditations, which, while I'm sure is just the terrible screenwriter not really knowing what he's talking about, wasn't something that was necessarily on public display. It was a very Like we have the access to it now, and it's something that like, you know, that like it removed from his contemporary thing is something that we judge Aurelius by. But like this Meditations was not meant for anybody outside of like his close circle. So the idea of, you know, this guy being Aurelius's slave and has had access to read Meditations and everything like that, these are big deals. And so the question is why would a guy who was a servant and a slave to Aurelius want to destroy Aurelius's dream? And I know that there are going to be some people who see this and go, oh, well, that's easy. He's a slave. You're thinking about this from a modern context where much of how our society views slavery is based around the concept of slavery defined by, as it is by the transatlantic slave trade, especially in the United States, which comes with it a whole bunch of notions of white supremacy and all these other things. You cannot take that approach when looking at classical antiquity. We're talking about an era where slavery was just a societal norm, and it could be the result of you being on the losing side of a battle, or hell, there were people that sold their children into slavery if they had outstanding debts. And it was the only way to make sure that, you know, they could feed all of their kids, is they'd send the youngest off to be a house slave in some dominus's place to pay off a debt. They were societal norms. So you have to actually go and explain what this is. And to that point, there are plenty of instances where you had very good slave owners who treated their slaves like almost like family, and there was a lot of loyalty there. And with how Aurelius was portrayed in the first film and how the legacy of that portrayal continues and has its presence in Gladiator 2, it comes to questions like, okay, so what did this guy do to spite Macrinus and make Macrinus want to tear the whole thing down? And so like, and these are things that you can kind of find throughout the whole movie, you know, and this going into what doesn't work is it's a very paper thin plot, and it is a complete rehash of the first movie with none of what makes the first movie work. Like, you know, they did the whole, oh, we're going to do a battle reenactment thing. But you look at how this serviced the plot of the first movie. In the first film, you see a reenactment of the Battle of Zama, right? You've got the forces of Scipio Africanus against Hannibal. And Proximo has brought his prized gladiators, and in particular Maximus, the Spaniard, as he's called at this point of the film, has brought this guy to the Colosseum to make money, to be profitable. And he is convinced that these are the best gladiators out there. And so he gets into the first round of the contest, and he's in a predetermined match. He is in a match where they are doing a historical reenactment, and his soldiers are supposed to lose. And they make this very clear. And the reason why this is important is because Maximus then goes and leads his fellow gladiators against what they're supposed to do, and they beat the stand-ins for the Roman forces, which creates which acts as like an act of defiance. And this serves to bring the antagonist of the film, Commodus, down into the arena to meet them, and he offers them mercy and what have you. And then that's when you get the big reveal that it is Maximus, that he has survived, and he gives his awesome speech about, like I'm Maximus Decius Brutus, like commander of the Felix legions, father to a murdered wife, husband to a murdered wife, father to a murdered son, and I will have my vengeance. Like, great freaking scene. So how do we do that in the second movie? Well, in the second day of the games, we find out that they're doing a reenactment of Salamis, but there's no consequence to it. And unless you're actually familiar with history, you don't know anything about that battle. Like, yes, it's a very important battle in history. If you paid attention in high school history or college history or whatever, you probably know that the Greeks win, and it's Greeks versus Persians. But that like it doesn't mean anything. You don't have a thing where Macrinus is like pissed. There is no stake in it because it doesn't inform the audience. Even Lucius's dynamic with his other gladiators. This would be hard enough to pull off because Paul Mescal, and I say this, and I know that there's going to be like, oh, you have like this is just an opinion, but like seriously, one of the most uncharismatic leading men I've ever seen. The guy has the personality of wet cardboard, and I think that probably the biggest testament of this is Gladiator 1 opens with Russell Crowe giving this freaking amazing speech to his men before they charge into battle to showcase just how charismatic and bound to leadership this guy is. You get 5 to 10 lines of dialogue from Paul Mescal's Lucius Hano for the first 45 minutes of that movie. The guy barely fucking talks. And when he does talk, he sounds almost like Johnny Bravo. He's not anybody that you would go look at and be like, yeah, that guy's going to go lead men into battle, do all these things. He doesn't have that spark that you need. We'll bring up, since I'm talking about Mescal, we'll bring him up so that people can see him. There's Pedro. Lots of pictures of Pedro. I've got a whole bunch of these things kind of pulled up. So this is him in the arena fighting the baboons, which were like horrible CGI. And I realize that CGI is like the standard of how these guys do things now. But I remember in the first Gladiator, they brought in a real fucking tiger for the battle between the Spaniard and Tigra. When they bring out there's a big plot point. So like Maximus has revealed his identity. The Emperor has given him mercy, but he needs to get rid of Maximus. Like, it's a problem that he is alive. Maximus was like the whole crux of the film was Aurelius wanted Maximus to become emperor. Commodus killed Aurelius. And when Maximus didn't give Commodus his loyalty, Commodus went and Maximus and his family were supposed to be purged per Roman politics. So Maximus being alive poses a massive problem to him. So he goes and he brings out of retirement probably the best gladiator of recent memory. And you get this fantastic fight between Tigra and Maximus. And Tigra's like one of his specialty things is he has a pet tiger that comes out from the Colosseum floor and is supposed to help him. And it's awesome. And in a way, the baboons and the rhinoceros are both supposed to kind of be stand-ins for that. But it's just, they look so freaking bad. Like, all the CGI in this is insane. The CGI freaking sharks at Salamis, which I've already gone over. There's no way in hell. Like, yes, the Romans kept animals beneath the Colosseum. There is no way that the Romans had the ability to store sharks in any form of aquarium. Like, yes, there were sharks in the Mediterranean and what have you that they probably could have gotten access to, but like, you realize that sharks are like deep water creatures generally, and like, to be able to go and capture one would be a severe pain in the ass. So to have them in the arena is just ludicrous. But like, and like, that's really what it comes down to, is Gladiator 2 is a movie that it really just is trying to retread what worked about the first movie, but it doesn't give you a basis as to why. And this also goes into like the historical inaccuracies, which the first movie has tons of them. And I understand that there's the whole mantra, especially in the creative realms, don't let the truth get in the way of telling a good story. But there's a line between that and just being outright wrong and shitting down the truth's throat. Ellie, the final metamorphosis, says, Ali sent me. Thanks for joining us. We're talking about the dumpster fire that is Gladiator 2. Speaking of terrible CGI, hold on. Here's our Gladiator riding. Like, this is like Black Panther 1 rhinoceros bad. Also, terrible thing to be mounted on. I don't know why you would do this. The animals can barely fucking see. They're very temperamental, and I don't think anybody has tried to do this and succeeded. Like, this is one of those like a Darwinism moments where you're just like, yeah, well, survival of the fittest, and you're a dumbass. You deserve to kind of be weeded out. But like, and even with this scene, they try to kind of mirror this to Maximus's fight with Latigra, but they invert it. So Maximus, when he fights Latigra, defeats him, and the crowd wants Maximus to kill the guy. And so the emperor gives the order, and then Maximus refuses. And then the crowd goes wild because it's like, oh man, what a badass. In this, they have Lucius or Hanno or whatever. He gets his ass kicked initially. And the Roman crowd wants him to have mercy because he did really well during the fight. And so Geta gives him mercy. And then from the crowd, he's like, oh, I refuse mercy and this, that, the other. And then he takes the moment of the gladiator like winding up to give the coup de grace to, maneuver himself and then kill this gladiator after the crowd gives him the thumbs up to kill him, or the thumbs down to kill him, and he beheads him, like, no questions asked. Like, you completely missed the point of why this worked in the first film. In the first film, it's a defiance on Roman might. He gives mercy when. In this, Lucius denies Roman mercy and then kills the guy. which is especially hilarious because like Lucius's whole narrative in this movie is he is anti-Rome most of the film and believes that Rome corrupts and destroys everything it touches, and he wants nothing to do with it. And then magically by the end of the film, all of a sudden he's like, you know what? The dream is important to preserve. I need to do the right thing and establish the Republic back, which is very funny because by this point in time, and this is even a problem with the first movie, you would never have been able to reestablish the Republic. You wouldn't have. The Empire had run as an empire for too long, and with how expanded out it was, you needed the authority of a singular individual that would be able to command the respect of the army. And you're just not going to you weren't going to have that with the Republic. You couldn't have done it. But at the end of the day, this is meant to reinforce the first movie, and it fails at that in pretty much every level. It completely undercuts it. And this was the problem with doing a direct sequel. Mo, okay, so I was going to do this stream last night. I've switched to a new medication recently, and I crashed hard. And so I was going to do this at like 10 p.m. last night, and then I crashed. So like I was wiped, and so I decided I was going to push it back, and I hopped on to do it today. Hail Mo, thanks so much for joining us. But yeah, so yeah, that's really where this movie's problem lies. Is it wants to be a rehash of the first film. It has none of the sincerity, and the plot has more holes than the Titanic post iceberg. Nothing works. If you think about anything too hard, it falls apart. And then when you start and that's just from the basic ass movie standpoint. Once you start looking at this from a historiographic standpoint, which I can't help but doing as a Roman history guy, all of this stuff starts to fall to crap. I mentioned at the beginning of the synopsis that I gave that Lucius had found sanctuary in Numidia, and that the movie inciting incident is a Roman sea invasion of Numidia, and this is in 200 AD. There's just one major fucking problem with this. Numidia was a Roman province at 46 BC, when as a part of Julius Caesar's African campaign. So that wouldn't have been out of Roman reach at all. It's crap. And Rome wouldn't go invade one of its freaking provinces. You could say that if they had an uprising to try and rebel against Roman rule, okay, understandable. Then Rome sends a legions out there, and you could have done that. But it's this is basic ass shit. Numidia was already. What's wrong with old Midia? I don't know, Mo. If Rome was already in control of something, why would they go and retake it? And this also goes into the silly ass line where freaking General Acacius, played by Pedro Pascal, tells Geta and Caracalla, your domain now expands beyond the reach of any previous Roman emperor. By this point, Rome's territorial holding was in decline. They were losing ground and had been for a while. Hadrian had to consolidate the borders of the empire because Trajan pushed well beyond what Rome could sustain. Trajan, it's common knowledge. Trajan was the emperor that pushed Rome to its zenith, territorially speaking. So, like, this is just a bad fucking joke. And then you look at the interpretations of Caracalla and Geta. And they are caricatures of Rome's worst emperors kind of rolled into one. Or rolled into two, I should say. Like, Caracalla is a very clear Caligula ripoff. He with the added bonus of being syphilitic. They make him, he has a disease in his groin that is spread to his brain, and he has a pet monkey that he names first consul of Rome by the end of the movie. Like, it's very much, hey, he's Caligula, but it's Caracalla. And then you have Geta, who kind of feels like Nero, but not like it. The point is that neither of these people are strong rulers, and then it's ironic that they're promoting military leaders and giving them triumphs and stuff like that, giving them public spotlight, which would diminish their authority over the Imperium, because if they're not out there doing all these stuff and they're giving the credit to all these people, this is a thing that Augustus was a master of, was the victories of his generals were not his generals' victories. They were the victories of Caesar. And he is the one that kind of starts this trend. And it's absurd. And it's like, I understand that Ridley Scott has like no fucking regard for portraying history with any relative accuracy. He's made that clear across several films, and they've diminished and like they've decreased in quality like every freaking time since Gladiator. But if you're going to write in these period settings, you have to understand how they work. And it's very clear he doesn't. From, people would say that the things I mentioned are small details, but they're not. They're massive. I mean, a general, like ever since the Marian reforms during the late Republic, generals commanded the loyalty of legions. Legions are the people that preserve the Imperium. Why would you, as emperor, give so much reward and public ovation to a man who could remove you from the throne? And by this point, Rome had seen its fair share of political turmoil. Commodus, when Commodus died, you have a whole bunch of people grasping for the throne, and it eventually leads to Septimius Severus creating the Severan dynasty, which is what Caracalla and Geta are a part of. They're Septimius Severus's sons, and like ironically, they're not even particularly terrible rulers. You could say that Caracalla had a bit of a mean streak. He has his brother Geta murdered because they didn't get along well, and he didn't want to share power with him. But Caracalla was a competent emperor and did a lot of things that are actually pretty good. But we go into this and we're using them as villains. And fine, do whatever you want. But these people are a part of the same dynasty where, like, not even a year and a half ago, everyone was talking about Septimius Severus, the Black Emperor. Nobody talks about because he was an African. He was from the Punic region. He was from New Carthage. So I think it's very interesting. It is a movie that really doesn't know what it wants to say, in my opinion. And I guess I shouldn't say that. It knows what it wants to say. It's a cry against imperialism. It's a cry against violence. But it doesn't know how to say it properly. It constantly contradicts itself. And it is a hypocritical film in pretty much every way. And I genuinely am confused. And I'm sure that people are going to watch this, and like by this point, we've been live for about an hour, and I'm sure that there are going to be people that get bored to death listening to the synopsis, and I apologize, but like I hope that you guys get to this point, because it's one of these things where history has such a rich tapestry. Like, we talked about how Macronus doesn't make sense and how terrible this portrayal. Like Denzel's Washington, Severus was a proud Chinaman. Oh my God. Thank you, Mobix. But like we talked earlier about how, Denzel Washington gives a very good performance for Macronus, but his story the story of his character completely fails, because it relies on never telling you, and it relies on never showing you what he's about, And the funny thing is that the actual person Macronus is a pretty freaking interesting guy. This is a guy like he does do what Macronus does in the film, although he doesn't not in the way that is in the film. He does manipulate Caracalla and have him assassinated. But he does so on the precipice of a campaign in Parthia, and then he leads the military in Parthia and gets killed. He loses. And so he's only in power for like a year, I think. And he's the end of the Severan dynasty, but very adept political manipulator with an interesting history in his own right, rising from like a middle-class lawyer to a prefect of the Praetorian Guard to emperor. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. But instead, we get this half-baked story on, he was a slave to Aurelius who's remade himself in the Roman image. And like they mention that he's a merchant and stuff, but you never see him do any of this. There's a lot of tell, not show, which for any medium is a failure. You need the audience to experience what these characters are, what they have been through, in order to understand their motives. You've got this conversation between Macronus and Lucilla, where he talks about, I even read Aurelius's your father's meditations, and also so this guy had access to the person of Marcus Aurelius, and yet his own daughter doesn't recognize him. And you can say that that's some clever commentary about X, Y, or Z, but it's not. This is one of those things where I feel like anybody who writes any subplot about slavery or what have you in today's media does it from a modern perspective through the lens of the transatlantic slave trade, where it's like, these people were seen not as people, but as property, and there's a whole supremacy angle. It's like, yeah, there's some of that in antiquity, but generally speaking, a household slave was viewed as a part of the household. And a good slave master treated those people with the dignity and respect of most family members. Yes, they were slaves, they were owned, but there was always different circumstances and different types of slaves, and there was almost a social hierarchy within the slave community. And point of fact, there were a lot of there's actually an interesting video that I think Metatron did, where he talked about how slaves in the ancient world, and particularly in Rome, had a lot more certifications and qualifications than a lot of freedmen, because slaves were generally used to become doctors of the household or chefs or this or that. And so they had to go through a trade school, a craft. And so they had a lot of knowledge. Teachers and tutors were usually slaves. There was a whole market for purchasing slaves that had the ability to read and write in Greek, because Greek was the language of the aristocracy. Greek was the language of academia of that time. Slavery had a completely different dynamic in society than it did in the colonial period, where we associate the transatlantic slave trade and then everything through the Civil War. It's completely different. And so to sit here and have him be like, oh, well, I was a slave of Aurelius, it's not good enough. It's not. Because at the end of the day, if you've kind of established Aurelius to be this champion of the people that wants to restore the Republic, that abolished the gladiatorial games for however brief of a time it may have been, but did all of these things and was looking to restore Rome to the Republic, you can't have that and then have it be like, oh, well, he was without, and then have this guy Macrinus say that, oh, I was his slave and I want to tear down his dream. Why? Why do you want to do this? Because it doesn't line up. Because if you have this guy that is so saintly austered by everyone, and even if that's the reason, you have to show it. And I think what's also a thing with this, I think that the writers were trying to kind of make Washington's Macrinus almost like Iago in Othello, where Iago tells the audience about 12 different reasons for why he's doing what he's doing, and they all conflict with one another, is never consistent. And the real reason why Iago is doing what he is doing is he fucking loves chaos. He loves sowing it. That's what he's really all about. Everything else is bullcrap. It's him being an unreliable narrator in his monologues. But we don't get that from Macrinus. We're not watching a stage play where he can stop and talk to the audience and tell you why he is doing what he's doing. You get what you get from him talking with the other characters, and none of that links up. All we know is he was in the service of Marcus Aurelius, and for whatever reason, he wants to destroy Aurelius's dream, which when you look at pretty much everyone else that was associated with that man in the context of this film and its predecessor, makes no sense, because everybody has this almost worship of Aurelius for his civic virtue and his good treatment of the people around him, his duty to his people. And that's where this film just falls flat. That and the fact that Paul Mescal is just such a terrible lead, especially by comparison to Russell Crowe. And whether or not people say it's fair for those two to be compared, that's immediately what's going to happen. Because Russell Crowe defined the first movie with his performance. Maximus was the protagonist, and so whoever follows him up is going to be immediately compared to Russell Crowe. And this guy falls real fucking short. Pedro Pascal does okay. He's barely in the movie. He's in it for, I think, maybe 20 minutes of runtime, which I think is funny because they literally promoted him promoted him in advertisements as like the new Commodus, which he's not. And Joseph Quinn does a decent enough job. And the guy who plays Caracalla, I'm looking on his name. He does good with what he's given. They wanted him to play a crazed syphilitic emperor, and he does that well. He does play a good Caligula effectively, but this is an issue of that's not who these people were. But granted, as we've established, Ridley Scott doesn't give a shit about actual history, so whatever. But yeah, I don't know if I have anything else really to say about it. It's not a good movie. It doesn't stand up. And even the people who I'm seeing enjoying it pretty much go, I mean, I had a good time, but it's certainly a far cry from the original. And that's not a win. I think financially it brought in $50 million on its opening weekend. I can't remember what I don't know what its budget is, but I don't know if it will regain its budget. That's one of the big things is historical epics are incredibly expensive. Budget is between 210 and 310 million. It's probably not going to make that back. Like we're heading into the holiday season. There's a bunch of really good movies coming out, or movies that look really good that are coming out over the next couple of months. I don't even know if this will make it till Christmas. It's an R-rated film, and it doesn't hold a candle to the original. And while there are definitely people who are enjoying it, everybody kind of agrees that the spectacle is fun, but the narrative falls flat. So you rate it 2 popcorns out of a soda? Yeah, that sounds fair. Oh, and I guess the most important thing that also goes against it is no cannon gate. I think that if it had just done like utterly stupid crap and had the Romans using cannons and shit, I probably would have at least enjoyed it for that. Even though it would have been inaccurate as all fuck. I would have at least had fun with that and had something fun to talk about. But really, this movie is tired. And I am tired of talking about it after an hour and 18 minutes and several phone calls kind of organizing my thoughts and what have you. But I can't get a refund for my $12 I spent, but I definitely wish I could. And I think that the shitty thing is that I don't want to say it holds up enough, but like by the time I really wanted to leave the movie theater, I had already invested 2 hours, and it's a 2.5 hour movie. So I was like, I can't justify this. I wouldn't be able to go get a refund on anything, so I'm just gonna fucking finish the movie. But it is a bad film. So these are my thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed them. Hell, the Lord says I wouldn't care less about this movie. There's only one Gladiator. I agree, and I think that's what the biggest shame of this is the movie completely undercuts the first film by having it be that you have these two. Like the first movie exists in its own fantastical, not Rome history, historical setting, because the whole point is, we're going to reestablish Rome as a republic, which we, as from a modern perspective, know doesn't fucking happen, right? But whatever, for the services of an individual story, it works, right? But by making a direct sequel, you undercut Maximus's sacrifice, because you go, okay, well, it's been 16 years and Rome has 2 emperors and it's even more corrupt than it was under Commodus. All right, so he fails on the macro level. What about the micro level? the goal was to protect Lucius, right? Like his final words to Lucilla are, "Is the boy safe?" And she tells him yes. And then we immediately get, oh, well, he was shipped out away from Rome to protect him, to protect him from the political backlash of the interregnum, right? Like Commodus is dead. This kid is now the heir apparent to Rome. Every freaking political manipulator is going to be out to either kill him or control him. Welcome to politics in Rome, in Imperial Rome. So, like, okay, yes, it makes sense that they would have to send him away, but again, this undercuts it because the whole freaking point was Maximus does this to save Lucius. Maximus dies to save this kid. Johnny JP7, not like Rome was a real thing anyway. No need to get worked up about it. Ugh, Mom Millennial. The freaking worst. And Hail the Lord says this movie would have worked if it had had the same theme but a different culture. I don't even think you need a different culture. You can still do Rome, but I think that the biggest problem is if you wanted to do another Gladiator movie, you needed to do it in a different time of Roman history. I think that it would have, I think that you probably could have done a good job if you went back. If you did something to set up like one of the servile wars. Hell, you could have even done Spartacus as the focus of a Gladiator movie. And I know that it's like, oh, well, they did Spartacus, Blood and Sands and stuff like that on Stars. And so there would be the immediate comparisons there. But making a direct sequel to the first movie was a mistake because it undercuts the first film. And then very funnily is like they recycle footage from the first movie at certain points and inject it to be like, oh, he's just like Maximus or this, that, the other. And it's like, this hits so hollow because you have undone the weight of the movie. Yes, the good thing about a certain series is exactly. You need to know is like there's a time to just say, hey, this was the story we wanted to tell. It's been told, walk. But I think that that's like the biggest problem is it just feels like a half-assed rehash of the first movie with none of the sincerity. And the fact that I don't even think I talked about this. The opening credits is like, you guys remember like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and the opening credits of 2 and 3 were these beautiful hand-drawn montages by Alex Ross of what happened in the previous film. They do that, except it looks like it's through like an AI filter to make it feel like it's hand-drawn, but it's like a filter over footage of the first movie. It's very clearly not. It's not animated at all. It's just we took the original film, and we took scenes from the original film and put them through this filter, and we're good. And then it ends with the exact same scene of fucking the ending scene of the first movie, which just feels like not only unearned, it feels so out of place. Like Lucius is back in the arena where his mom has died and all of the corpses of all the people that were there are gone. And he is like calling out to his mom, and then he's like grasping the sands of the arena, and he's like looking off into the distance, and then it cuts to Maximus's hand flowing through the Elysian fields, like the corn, the barley fields that you have at the beginning and end of Gladiator 1. And it's just like, it's so fucking disrespectful. But anyways, we've been going for about an hour and a half at this point. I hope you guys appreciated the very long-winded rant of mine. But I appreciate everyone for coming to hang out. Mo, I'm so sorry that last night's stream got pushed back. Like the stream got pushed back. I saw your comments in the chat last night. They were really good, but I was fading, man. But thanks so much for coming to hang out. Real quick, we have the sign up page for Elysian Fields Reborn, which is the reboot of my first series. And I'll pull that up here real quick. Link is in the description. Mo, if you can post that in the chat. We're at 31 followers, but here's a look at some of the stuff. And I'm going to stop here because there's a certain cover that I haven't revealed on other socials there. You can go check it out. I know that that's kind of silly, but I want it up on the pre-launch page. So if you go check that out, you'll get to see a really cool cover. But sign up. Let's get this over 50 signups here. And yeah, at this point, we're gonna call this a day. And yeah.
Pizza. Pizza, 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 pizza.